Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and in this video we're going to be tackling something that has been requested quite a bit. This is going to be on our good old friend the Xbox 360, and this is going to be the Reset Glitch Hack 3. Now for anybody who does not know, this is a modification that will allow your Xbox 360 to run unsigned code. That'd mean you'd be able to run homebrew applications, emulators, run backups of your games without a disk, all of that fun stuff. And typically the Reset Glitch Hack involves taking a NAND programmer, hooking it up to the console internally, so then we can dump the NAND, use some magic to decrypt it, write back a modified NAND, which will allow us to do all the fun things that we want to, and in order to boot up that modified NAND, we would typically need a glitch chip such as this. Well, what if I told you that this modification will completely omit the need for a glitch chip? So this thing right here, we can just throw it away. We don't need it at this point. So the big difference with Reset Glitch Hack 3 is, why don't we just use the console to glitch itself? This has all been done thanks to 15432, the awesome work that he has done, and he also credits Dr. Shotsky as well as Octal for assisting with help and useful information and other things to get this all up and running. This here, in my opinion, is pretty much the final frontier for Xbox 360 hard mods, because at this point you can hard mod an Xbox 360 and reset glitch it without the glitch chip, which is absolutely fantastic. And we can do it pretty affordably here in 2022 and beyond. Now to do this, we are going to need a few things, and let's just go ahead and get into our parts list here, as well as really what I'm specifically going to be using. So first of all, you will still need a NAND programmer, and this guide is going to be covering the Trinity model of the Xbox 360. I do plan to cover other motherboards at different times, but this one is just going to be the Trinity because this is the candidate I have in front of me. This is the guinea pig we're going to be using, which we are in luck. This is a Trinity Xbox 360 Slim. So you will still need a NAND programmer for your console. Now there's many NAND programmers that you can use, but this is what I'm going to recommend here in 2022 and beyond. I have two recommendations. The first one here is going to be the xFlasher 360. This is probably the best, I would say the best Xbox 360 NAND flasher and programmer out on the market, specific for the Xbox 360. This has actually been created by Element from the mod shop and has also been graciously provided to the channel for free, kind of just to use in videos, review, and all that fun stuff. So that is to say, that does not sway my opinion on the product here, but this was sent over for free, so we're going to be using it in here. So this is something that you can pick up pretty affordably, and I will have links to everything down below. However, if you're wanting something, well, even more affordable, and maybe if you cannot attain that, there's also been another development as well too, which is really awesome. This has been created by Balika011, who is a friend of the channel here, and not this specifically, but what is flashed on here. This is a Raspberry Pi Pico, and installed on here is a firmware called PicoFlasher, which turns this into a Xbox 360 NAND programmer. So I have already flashed this with PicoFlasher, and I have wired this up specifically to work with a Trinity, and I can confirm it does work, and it works well. This is a fantastic alternative as well too, and this is pretty affordable in case you cannot get a hold of a xFlasher 360. But really, what I'm going to be using for the rest of this video, I will be touching up on the PicoFlasher, but I'm going to be using the xFlasher on here, but that is to say, this is completely interchangeable. But if you're looking for a NAND programmer, these are the only two current day and going forward that I can recommend: the xFlasher 360 as well as PicoFlasher. Really, it's just going to be your choice picking which one you want to use and purchase. Don't worry, if you do have existing hardware such as a NAND X, you can still use it. That's totally fine. However, if you're somebody who is looking for a programmer, you do not have one, I would not recommend looking for a NAND X, a JR programmer, a Matrix flasher. You can still use those, but they're older, older, the drivers aren't going to be signed. It's just a little more annoying to get everything up and running when you have fantastic modern solutions such as I've mentioned, these two right here. So any NAND programmer will do, but if you're looking for specific recommendations, these two are the ones that I can recommend. Now, in terms of basic soldering equipment, you will need the necessary soldering iron and skills to get this all up and running. This guide is not going to teach you how to solder, but if you're able to pick up some things from it, that works out as well too. But the tools that I'm going to be using here, of course, I'll have my soldering iron on deck, but I am going to be using some Kingbo Flux. This stuff still works incredibly well for me. I'm also going to be using some Kynar or wrapping wire. I've noticed this stuff is pretty good. It gets the job done. This is 30 gauge, and I do like this because it is a solid core, so you don't have to worry about threads and such. You can certainly use some wire like I have in the back right there, nothing wrong with that, but there are going to be some very small points that we're going to be hitting, so if we can make everything cleaner and easier using some solid core Kynar wire, this is going to work out well enough for us. I'm also going to be recommending some isopropyl alcohol. I would recommend at least 91%. As you can see, this stuff is 99% right here, so this will work out just fine as well too. To get that all cleaned up, I'm going to have some Q-tips as well an old nasty toothbrush that I use specific for this because it's going to help out. For anything specific for this modification, you are going to need a 10K resistor for the Trinity motherboard. Now, this is the type of resistor that I am using here. These are pretty cheap, and typically they're sold in sets of like 10 or 25 or a few hundred, so I just purchased 100 at once. They're quite affordable. I think you can get 100 for like $5 or so, but you will need a resistor such as this, and it needs to be a 10K resistor. To get the resistor nice and insulated, you can also use something like heat shrink tubing with the resistor and your wiring, or you can use something such as this tape right here, which this is just Captain tape, and I'm actually going to be using the both of these. There will be one incredibly small point that we need to scrape a bit of the motherboard in order to access, and in order to do that, it's been recommended that you will literally have to scrape the motherboard. We do need to be very careful with it, but we do need to use a useful but possibly dangerous tool in order to do that. So I myself am going to be using an X-Acto knife. Now this can cause a lot of damage, but if used properly and carefully, it will get the job done for what we need it to do. I'll show you once we get to that section of the video. However, you can also use something like I know Octal and even 15432 have recommended using something like tweezers, the sharp end of a pair of tweezers, in order to scrape and get to the point that we need to access. So you will need just a sharp tool such as one of these. Since we'll be taking apart this Xbox 360, a part of it will be removing the X clamp, which I would recommend doing, and in order to do that, well, to make it much easier, there will be a X clamp removal tool, which I will also recommend. This isn't necessary, but it makes it much easier and safer to do, in my opinion, and after doing several consoles with this, I do not want to work on a console without one of these. And since we're taking this apart, it would be recommended and even required to repaste it. So for this, I'm one of those people where I do use Arctic Clean. You can use something else such as isopropyl alcohol in order to remove the old thermal paste, and then you can choose whichever good thermal paste you want to utilize to apply to the system. I'm going to be using MX4, so we've got that all covered. Now, lastly, to get into the system itself, it would help to have a good electronic toolkit to get into this. I like using this iFixit toolkit I got years ago, and we're going to need a couple bits here at minimum. We will need a T10 security bit as well as a T8 security bit to get into this system. Now we will also, because we're going to be popping some tabs and such internally, we are also going to need something like a long flathead screwdriver in order to pop some tabs internal on the system, but that's not all too difficult. So even if you don't have a flathead screwdriver, just a long flat like metal tool will do you a whole world of good. So that should be about all we need to get started on here. You can use more, you can use less, but I just wanted to go through my laundry list of inventory of items to get through this. Now let's go ahead and move this all to the side and actually get into the console here. I would like to also give some credit over to the fine folks over at Xbox 360 Hub. Not only their written guide was quite informative and well done, I did look at that and did use it as a basis to really doing a video adaptation of this here. So a big shout out and thank you to the folks over there for writing up the guide and getting it out there. I would also like to thank Octal from Octal's console shop for just letting me bounce some information and such off him, verify a few things, and he was definitely a really awesome resource to help get this all started and set up. So here we go. Getting into this at the beginning is pretty easy. What you'll need to do is start removing the grates. At the bottom, remove the smallest one, which is hiding the hard drive, and pull out the hard drive if you have a hard drive installed in this console. Then just pull out the rest of the grate. That can easily be done with your fingers. Now what you want to do for this top grate here is you'll want to use something flat that you have. As you can see, I'm actually using that X-clamp removal tool, but you can easily use something like a flathead screwdriver to just pop off that grate. Now, this part and the next part I'm going to show you, in my opinion, are the most annoying parts of disassembling this system. It's going to be removing the rest of the bottom pieces right here. Now, there is this flat black matte covering, and you'll kind of have to go in there through these holes that you'll see, and there's just going to be some tabs that are going to be attached to the top and bottom of the console that you need to work on popping. Now, this flat black piece that I'm kind of pulling up here, you can remove that as well too, but it's not necessary. You'll kind of notice that the rest of this piece ends up starting to pop off. So you'll kind of need to use a bit of a combination of popping the tabs, and you also might have to pull at it a little bit away from the console. Just make sure you're not doing anything all too destructive on here. It's going to feel like you're going to break something, so you're just going to want to make sure you can really pop off the internal tabs the best that you can. I noticed here, once I had it loose enough, I honestly just used a little bit of force and it was able to come off like that. So there we go, we have the bottom piece off. Now we just need to do it one more time at the top. Now again, it's going to be about the same thing here, where there's going to be these little holes that you can slide a flathead tool into, and there's going to be tabs that you're going to be releasing. Now, as you're going into these tabs here, you could also lift up and you'll even see that the black flat piece here is going to kind of become disconnected from this. This is totally fine. It will actually probably increase visibility as well too. But as the pieces here are coming off, you'll kind of just need a combination of pulling the piece off as well as releasing the tabs, and this will eventually pop off. Once you end up getting it here, there you go. In my opinion, those are the two hardest parts of taking apart the console. So the rest of it is pretty easy if you have the right pieces. Now at the top of the console is the Wi-Fi board. Just take your T10 security bit and unscrew the single screw here holding this down. Once you have it unscrewed, remove the Wi-Fi board and just pop these somewhere safe. Once that's done, there's these two tabs. We are not done with the tabs yet. What I do, these are pretty easy to get to, is I kind of just pop these here, make sure they are released, and then I take the bottom of the console and kind of externally move it to the top, or kind of just covering it like you can see right there, just to make it easier when we're working on the other side. There's two more tabs on the bottom of the system. One of them is easier to get to, and the other one, it's not impossible, but it's much harder to get to. So I'm going to show you all a little trick. But the first tab, just like the other ones, you can just go in and release it. And if you're able to get down to the second tab, that is totally fine. But for the second tab, if you have a really small round tool or bit or a push pin or even a paper clip, I'm going to show you a really easy way that you can pop this. Now it's a little bit difficult to find, and there is this label here which we are going to have to pop a hole in the label, but once you find the hole and pop it in, it will release that hidden tab easily. So you can kind of find it right about there, and you're going to feel for it. And once you feel it, as you can see, you just push into that hole and you're able to release that second tab. Removing the bottom of the system is pretty easy. Just remove it like that and make sure that you are careful when doing it, of course. If you want to here, you could also remove the faceplate and just be really careful when doing this. There's also just going to be similar tabs like this on the other side, and you can kind of just wiggle it around and release it. But the reason why I'm saying be careful is because there's going to be a ribbon connector. As you can see, it is connected to the RF board, and we just need to be really careful when disconnecting this. This is exactly how I do it here. You have to be really careful, make sure you're not just ripping it off. Very easy to make that mistake, but just do something like this and you're able to take it out. Easy as that. And now you can separate the faceplate. With our console upside down, we need to take our T10 screwdriver bit and remove 5 long black screws so we can actually get into the system itself. If you want to take out all the screws right now, you can do that as well too, but I'm just taking off the 5 black ones so we can get into the system here initially. Getting into the console here is easy enough, just lift off like that, and there you go, you're part of the way in. We can work on removing a few things here, such as the DVD drive. Just go here, disconnect the power, disconnect the SATA cable, and that's about it. Just remove the DVD drive. For the plastic pieces back here, you can remove that top screw for the hard drive, as well as a screw behind the system that is holding the rest of it in place. Flipping the system back around, at this point just remove the rest of the T10 screws securing in the motherboard, and after that we're going to remove the black T8 screws that are going to be securing in the X clamp. There's 2 more T8 screws right here, and these are the ones that are holding in the RF board. Just unscrew these 2 and then remove the RF board, and you can start removing the motherboard itself. Once the RF board has been removed, you'll see that all these other pieces are going to come off easily enough, so just take that off. The fan is still going to be in place, but we're going to remove the plastic piece back there for the hard drive and DVD drive. And we can now remove the motherboard itself. So this is a little bit annoying and kind of tricky to do, but you'll kind of just need to do this at an angle here, pulling it forward. And it's going to feel like it's not really going to pop out, but it will pop out. Just be kind of consistent with it and you'll be able to remove it. Once we have the motherboard pulled out, we also need to disconnect the fan itself. So this is easy enough, just find where the fan is connected to. It might be a little bit difficult, but pull out the fan connector and that should be about it. Now here we go, we're going to hit the dreaded X clamp, but if you have the X clamp removal tool, this is made much easier. All you need to do is take the tool and slide it into where the X clamp is. You don't want to slide it underneath where you're touching the motherboard, but you kind of want to slot it in like that. You're going to then kind of push downwards and towards the X clamp, and it's going to release it. So just like I'm showing right here, you're going to pop off one side, work on the opposite side, work on another side, and by the time you get 3 of these off, the 4th one should come off with absolutely no need to have the tool. So it makes this process much, much simpler. From here, you just gently lift the motherboard if you have this upside down, and there we go. We now have the heatsink separated, which is what we need. While we're here, just so we don't get gunk all over the place, let's go ahead and remove this old thermal paste. So this is where everybody kind of has their own methods on here. If you want to use something just such as isopropyl alcohol to do this, you can do that just fine. For me, I prefer to use Arctic Clean. I'm just kind of used to that. That's what I use. And all I use is the #1 solution. Drop a few drops on it here, wait a little bit, and then you can use something like a paper towel to remove the old thermal paste. You might have to use this a few times, so typically I'll do this 2, maybe 3 times. At least for this here, I've noticed for the big stuff, it helps to use something flat like a paper towel, and then for the smaller edges here, you can use something like a Q-tip to clean this off just fine. but you just want to make sure you do this a few times so you're going to get everything removed. Now you can use the number 2 solution, which is the purifier, and just use this at least a couple, maybe 2 or 3 times. You're just going to want to make sure, again, that this is a nice clean surface that we're going to be using later. All right, so now let's get our actual wiring solution set up. First of all, we're going to grab the resistor and we're just going to trim it down. Depending on what your preference is, it doesn't really matter what the length of these resistor legs is, just trim it down to your own liking. But this is kind of what I did here. I just end up taking this and you're going to solder a bit of wire to each side of the resistor. So the way I do it is, I found this worked easy enough. I just took the resistor leg, snipped it down, put it in a little bit of that flux, then ended up tinning it with solder. And at that point, I did the same thing with a piece of wire. I just stripped back the wire, put it in some of that flux, tinned it, and then soldered the two together. Once you get some wire tacked on there, you also want to just test it a little bit and make sure it's not going to fall apart. If you feel uneasy about your work, just go in and touch up on this, use more solder if you need to. You just want to make sure this is all good and it's not going to be falling apart or going anywhere. Once you do that on one side, to no surprise, we're going to do it on the other side. Just go ahead, trim the leg, and then for your resistor leg and the wire, make sure they are exposed, flux them, tin them, solder them together. The same thing. You're going to notice here that I'm using a much shorter wire length on one leg as opposed to the other. That's because I know this shorter wire I'm going to solder to near the front of the Xbox 360 itself, and the longer wire we're just going to kind of figure where it goes and then trim it back as needed. Awesome, everything's looking good, everything's feeling good. Here I choose to clean it off as well. So I just take some isopropyl alcohol, take some Q-tips, and just clean it off as easy as that. Nothing too big here. So here we go, now it is time to insulate this. What you want to do is make sure none of your resistor or the resistor leg is showing. And I'm choosing to use heat shrink tubing. Now, if you haven't used this before or you haven't used it too much like me, what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of taking a barbecue grill lighter and running it at one of the lower settings, and then I'm giving it some distance, like I'm keeping it a good amount underneath the wire itself. It's hard to tell here on camera, but I promise there's probably at least an inch or so of length there. The flame is not touching this. I'm really stressing this here because if you get it too close, if you get the heat too close, you will undo your work and you'll have to do this again with another resistor and some more wire. Go ahead, ask me how I know. But either way, once you have all of this set up here, as you can see, it's going to look a little something like that. You should be able to tell that it's going to shrink with heat, like the name of it says, and once it is all good, you can kind of do another bit of a test again once it's cooled down, and as long as your wires aren't popping off, nothing is disconnected, you should be all good. Now let's go ahead and start working on the motherboard itself. We're going to find the points that we need. There's only 4 of them, but at least for 3 of them right now, we're going to clean, flux, and tin them for later. The first one we can hit here is going to be really close to the X clamp itself. It's going to be this point right here, and we're going to just do what we said there. Go ahead and prep it by cleaning it with some isopropyl alcohol, fluxing it, and then tinning it. I cleaned this other area here as well too because we will need that later. Our next point we can repair is very close to the front of the console, and it is FT2V1. It can be found right next to the Microsoft logo. So we're going to do the exact same thing there. Go ahead and get it cleaned, fluxed, and tinned. Our third point is going to be just across the way from where the X clamp would be. It's going to be underneath the Southbridge chip, and it's going to be the R3R22 point. It's a little bit hard to find because there's so many components there and it's so small, but once you find it right there, very close to the 4 holes that make up where the south bridge chip is, just do the exact same thing there. Clean, flux, 10. Awesome, we've gotten 3 of our 4 points prepared. Now, there's a reason why I've held off on this 4th one. Actually, a microscopic reason. For a first time here on the channel, let's go ahead and actually break out a microscope for this. Now, this here is going to be a bit of a make or break point. And I will say, if you can get this point successfully, you can do the rest of the install. This is going to be the hardest point we're going to hit. But this is going to be underneath where the X-clamp would go. You're going to look for it here, and it's going to be a C5R35 that you're looking for. Now, between the R and the 3, there's going to be a via, and we need to expose this. What you can do is you can take a sharp tool, such as an X-Acto knife, or the sharp side of a set of tweezers, and you're going to just want to go in there and gently scrape it away. Now, you also need to be incredibly careful because there's a lot of small components here, but there's also a trace directly next to this here where that 3 is kind of overlaid on the mask itself. And if you cut that trace, you could brick your system. It will not work unless you're ready to do a trace repair, which that's not what we're going to be covering here. So you can see that I even kind of went over it a little bit, but anytime you have a little bit of doubt, that's why you don't want to use all too much pressure, and just make sure you go in here and you keep everything clean. Easy enough. You might have to do this a few times, but I just took a Q-tip with isopropyl alcohol, wiped this area down, and once it dried off, I was able to see a little bit more. Now, if this point takes you 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, don't worry about it. You just want to go slow and take your time if you're uncomfortable with this. But our goal is to get this exposed like we're seeing right here. As you can see, we're now seeing the via itself. It's nice and shiny. This is exactly what we're looking for. This is exciting. We just want to make sure that we're getting to this point, but we're not going to go any further to the point of damaging our motherboard. This is about the last bit of my work here exposing it, but as you can see, this is how it should be looking. You can probably even do a better job, but it needs to be exposed, it needs to be shiny, and it needs to be clean, so we can hit some solder on it and tack a wire onto this point. Either way, this is looking good enough that we can work with this. So you just want to do the same thing as before. Make sure your point is clean, make sure you flux it, and we're going to tin it to prepare it. Now you can see here that first of all, I'm just making sure that solder can actually stick to this point, and once I am able to confirm that this is able to flow on there with no issue, at that point I go in and I add more solder to this. There's not that much area we have to work with, so you kind of want to be generous with this here, but even being generous, there's not all too much solder that you're adding on here. Either way, that is it. We've been able to finish this off by preparing PLL bypass. Now let's go ahead and get everything wired up. I'm going to be using this photo as a reference here just with how my final install looked, but now we're going to go ahead and get our wire with the resistor soldered between SMC PLL and PLL bypass. First of all, the SMC PLL point is this FT2V1 point, and if you chose to have a smaller wire on one side of the resistor, you're going to want to tack that smaller wire here to FT2V1. I'm just doing a little bit of a wiggle test to make sure this point is safe and sound, but if you feel like you need to hit this point with a bit more solder or redo this here, feel free to. No worries on that, it's going to make this all better. Excellent, now let's attack PLL bypass. Now you probably have some excess wire on hand, so go ahead, trim and strip it back accordingly. And then once you're all prepared, you can get your wire soldered into this point. Now I'm going to keep this in right here because you're going to see that I'm not doing the best job here. This is okay, and I'm sure this would work, but I wasn't happy with it. So what I did was I went in and I touched up on this point. You want to be generous with this point. Again, there's no worries with that. It's a really small and difficult point to hit. So I just hit it with a bit more solder, took my wire, brought it in here, and as you can see, that's looking much better, and I am happy with this. So here we go. That's the hardest part of this installation, this point right here. If you have successfully hit this point, the rest of this should be much easier. With the confidence we got from successfully wiring up PLL bypass, we can do the exact same thing here. We're going to take a second piece of wire and we're going to solder it between SMC post and post. This is our SMC post point. Just take that strip back wire, solder it in, and there we go. You can do a little bit of a wiggle test if you need to, but that's looking all good. Now let's take the other end of this wire and get it soldered into post. Now I did have to record this at a bit of a different angle here than you would typically see if you're working on the console yourself, so just make sure that you have the correct orientation of this lined up with where the hole for the X-clamp is going to go, that you can see at the bottom of my screen. But what you need to do is find this exact point that we're going to be hitting. Once you have everything all good, you're just going to want to take the other end of that wire and we're going to solder it in. And there we go. It's as easy as that. Now here we go. Our console should look a little something like this. Just make sure your wires are set up in the same orientation here and they are connected to the same points accordingly. The nice thing is when it comes to RGH3 is that wire placement really doesn't matter on here, but the quality of our points with soldering here is what's going to matter. So what I did at this point was I just started cleaning all of these off. I took a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, Q-tips, and I even used a toothbrush as well too to get these all nice and clean. It'd also be recommended to secure these two wires. Thankfully, since there's only two, there's a lot less to secure than before, but I just took a bit of Captain tape and kind of secured everything a little something like this. You can do it your own way, but this is how I did it. So all of our wiring for RGH3 is done, but the bad news is we still have some more soldering to do because we need to solder in our NAND programmer. So we need to take our wires for our NAND flasher and get them soldered into the proper points. You're going to want to look for the NAND points on the console, and I'll zoom in here showing what you're looking for. Once you locate them, we're just going to clean, flux, tin, and then solder in our wires. Now I'm going to be quiet for the rest of this portion here because there's not all too much special or secret sauce that I really need to divulge in tips, but I will provide these two diagrams. If you have an xFlasher, you're going to be using this diagram. This also includes people who might be using something like a JR programmer, a matrix flasher, or a NANDX. But if you're using the xFlasher, this is what you'll be using. If you're choosing to use PicoFlasher, I do want to shout out and thank the Weekend Modder for creating and providing this diagram. Whichever flasher you choose to use, just follow the appropriate diagram. Excellent. Once you have the 7 wires soldered in, you might have them directly soldered if you're using the PicoFlasher, but if you're using the xFlasher, you're going to use a connector such as this and just plug it in. At this point, we should be good to go. At this point, we're going to be using the Xbox very soon, and for that, we should start putting it partially back together at least. So for this here, I'm just going to take my thermal paste and apply some fresh thermal paste on here. This is how I do it. I end up putting a good amount of thermal paste onto the heat spreader itself, and then I don't spread it out manually. I just take the heatsink, plop it back on gently, and then once it's been pressurized with the X clamp attached, it should be all good. Just so you don't forget later on, you could start by attaching the fan back to the motherboard itself with the fan connector here, and then apply the heatsink on top of the APU. Now, once you have the console flipped upside down, you're going to want to apply the X-clamp back onto it. So the X-clamp in the middle of it has a few holes, and I like to make sure that the oval-shaped hole is aimed towards the front of the console, the same way we found it. Now at this point, you can just hook it onto one of the legs here, and you can now start attaching the rest of them. So here, what you can do with the X-clamp removal tool is slot it in like so. But as you can see here, it's going to be a little bit different. You can kind of pull upwards on the removal tool, and you're going to push down onto the X clamp. So just like that. And I'm going to do it one more time here. But it's not all too hard to do, and it makes this so much easier. Now, once you have all 4 attached back in, just make sure it's nice and secure, and you should be all good. We can now take our motherboard and plop it back into the chassis here. Even if you have the NAND programmer hooked up, that's more than fine. It's not going to really get in the way of anything. As you can see, we're kind of just going to plop it back in an angle and make sure it is flush and sitting flat at the bottom. We will need our RF board for this, and if you want to use the power and eject buttons on here, you'll also need to attach the faceplate. So for this, we're just going to take the ribbon that is there, kind of flip it upside down, make sure that has been released, the clasp for this, and we're just going to plop it back in like so. From here, just make sure the RF board is connected properly to the console through everything, and our little Frankenstein should look a little something like this. Now we'll need to plug the Xbox 360 into power, so do that now. Do not turn the system on, do not try and utilize it, but we do need to make sure it's plugged into power. And once it's plugged into power, let's take it over to our PC. Alright, if you've made it this far and your soldering is all good, the rest of this is thankfully going to be a cakewalk. We're now going to get into the software and really programming portion of this here. The first thing we're going to need is going to be JRunner with extras, which you can always download the latest build of it from Octal's console shop. The link for this will be down below in the description. You're just going to want to come here, go over to Downloads, RGH JTAG, and download the latest build of JRunner with extras. Save it somewhere you can easily find it. Once you have this downloaded, you should be able to extract it with either the Windows default extraction software or your favorite extraction software. Just right click and extract it into its own folder. Once you get the JRunner with extras folder, all you need to do is run JRunner and make sure it works. And here we go. Now before we get too far in here, we need to set up our NAND programmer. Again, I'm only going to be showing explicitly on here the xFlasher and PicoFlasher. If you want to use any other NAND programmer, it's totally up to you. I'm just not going to show that in here specifically. But let's exit out of JRunner and we're going to install the drivers for xFlasher. There is a section you can do it here, but I prefer to just launch the exe itself. So let's exit out of JRunner. We're going to go into Common, Drivers, And you should see a file here called xFlasher drivers.exe. If you've never used the xFlasher, go ahead and run this. We're going to say yes, and it will step you through the process of installing this here. And there we go, ready to use. At this point, you should set the switch on the top of your xFlasher to SPI mode and hook it up to your computer through USB. It should be safe to do so. Now, once it's hooked up and powered, you can go back over here, open up JRunner, and as you can see, now xFlasher is showing up, but it's in SPI mode. So that means we have successfully installed the driver. Now, if you're going to choose to use PicoFlasher, you can absolutely do that. I'm going to have the link for PicoFlasher down below in the description that has been provided and created here by Balika011. Now, this GitHub might look a little daunting, and you can read up on the PicoFlasher here if you'd like to, but in order to get this all installed, we're going to just have to come up here, click on releases, and download the latest release of PicoFlasher. You're going to download and save this PicoFlasher.uf2 file somewhere you can easily find it. Just like before, I've saved this to my desktop. Now at this point, you're going to want to grab your Raspberry Pi Pico, and you're going to want to hold down the only button on there, which is boot cell, short for boot select. When you're holding down that button, you're going to want to plug in the USB cable to the device and to your computer. Make sure you're holding down that button before you hook it up to your PC and keep it held down. You'll want to bring up your drives and pay attention here, but once you do that, I'm going to plug this in, and you should see a new device pop up. Once you see this here RPI RP2, you can let go of the boot select button, but keep your device plugged in. All you need to do is open this up, copy out the PicoFlasher.uf2 file, and paste it. At that point, it should close out, and that's all there is to it. At this point now, you can physically disconnect the PicoFlasher device from your computer and plug it back in normally. Now, there's not going to be any sign of life to this just yet, but if you open up JRunner, check this out. You should see PicoFlasher right here, and if it's showing up, congratulations, you have now installed PicoFlasher on your Raspberry Pi Pico. So you should be good to go at this point with either of those NAND flashers. At this point here, you should have JRunner up and running. You should have your NAND programmer hooked up and ready to go. It should be hooked up through USB and hooked up to the NAND points on your console, and you need to plug your console into power. Do not turn it on, but just keep it plugged into power. Now, once we have all that set up, it should be at default for 2 NAND reads, and we can click on Read NAND. Give it a few moments. And here we go. Once it detects everything, it was able to get it all beautifully. This is indeed a Trinity 16 megabyte, and it's now going to do 2 NAND dumps. These are going to be super important to have on hand. And here we go. Perfect. So at this point, we now have 2 NAND dumps. Everything is looking good, and we need to create an ECC. So at this point, our selection over here is going to be glitch 2. We're going to enable RGH3. And it should pick at our megahertz automatically here. So once we have all of that set up, we can go ahead and click on Create ECC. Once the ECC has been created, we can click on Write ECC. This is going to be the first modification here we're going to be doing to the console itself, at least software-wise. So click that and give it a few seconds to flash. At this point, we now need to get the CPU key. Go ahead, disconnect your NAND programmer from the console itself, hook up the console to a monitor or TV, and turn it on. At this point, if everything has gone well, congratulations, you should see a blue screen here with Zell reloaded. This is exactly where we need to be. Now, once you let it run for a few seconds, there's going to be an extremely important value we need right here, and it's going to say your CPU key. What you need to do is type that manually into JRunner. As a bonus, if you turn off the system, plug your system into your local network and turn the system on, it should connect to your local network, and you can pull the CPU key from the IP address on here. I'm actually going to do that on my configuration. So I've just restarted it here. We're going to wait a bit, and as you can see, it was able to pull an IP address for me. So if you're able to connect your console to a network, awesome. If not, no big deal. You just have to type in that CPU key manually. Over here on JRunner, you're going to want to type in the CPU key, or again, if you're on a network, type in the IP address. If you're doing so, click on Get CPU CPU key. And here we go. Once we have that CPU key and it is correct, you should see all of your console information, and we've been successfully able to decrypt the NAND on here, which is exactly where we need to be. So this is fantastic. If you're entering in your CPU key and you're still not getting a success on here, double and triple check that you're entering the correct CPU key. More than likely, you're entering in incorrect values or characters for your CPU key. However, now at this point, once you have all the information you need, you should go ahead and turn off the console, keep it plugged into power, and plug in the console to your NAND programmer yet again. Now everything should be looking good here on JRunner. It should automatically pick everything for us, but just in case you need to double check, we are running the latest kernel version here. We're going to select glitch 2 and RGH3. None of that should change. If everything looks good there, we can go ahead and click on Create XE Build Image. Once that's all been created, make sure that your console is off and still plugged into power. Make sure the NAND programmer is plugged into your PC and your console, and at that point you can now click on Write NAND. Give it a few moments, it's now going to write over the modified retail image that we've just created, and very soon we'll be able to have a whole lot of fun. So there we go. At this point, our system should be fully modified. You can go ahead, disconnect your NAND programmer from your console, hook it back up to a TV or a monitor, and turn it on to see the fruits of our labor. So over at the console, go ahead, press the power button on there, just boot it up normally, and wait a few seconds. If everything is successful, it should boot up with some nice, beautiful green lights, and it's going to look at first like our system has not been modified, but I can promise you it is booting up as it needs to right now. We just don't have anything on a hard drive or any homebrew available, but this is what we are looking for. Our system is booting up successfully. If you want to verify this as well, we can actually turn off the system, and as opposed to hitting the power button, we're going to hit the eject button. Now when we hit the eject button, it should not boot up into retail, it should boot up into Zell Reloaded. Let's just give it a bit here. Oh, and perfect, that's about it. So congratulations, you now have modified your system and you're really all good to go at this point. Now, if you need some guidance on what to do next, I do have a video showing a basic Aurora setup and rundown, which is a custom dashboard, which I will have linked down below in the description. That's a really good starter video if you're just getting your feet wet in the world of Xbox 360 modding and you just need a good foundation to get your modded console up and running on, or if you've never messed with one of these before. But before we do all of that, we have verified this is working. Let's go ahead and tear down. We actually have one more software thing to do in regards to JRunner. We do need to make sure we have these files for our system in a safe place. So what you want to do is go into the load source, and you're going to want to copy out this path right here up to the xFlasher file and copy this out. Go to Windows Explorer, you can paste it in here, and hit enter. Now these files here are incredibly important. These are all the sensitive files for your system, and it contains very sensitive information such as the key vault, your CPU key, and all that fun stuff. Mainly the NAND dumps right here. You really need your original NAND dumps as well as your key vault info. So that way, in case anything ever goes wrong, like for example, let's say you flash something and you have a bad flash on your system and your system ends up bricking, you'll be able to easily recover as long as you have all of these original files. Now NAND dump 1 and 2 are our original retail NAND dumps, and we can always create new dumps from those, but if you want the modified image that we just created, that's going to be updflash.bin. So for example, if I bricked this console, I would hook it back up to a programmer, flash this original updflash.bin, and make sure it's all good and up and running. Do keep in mind, however, because of that RGH3 wiring, if you try and flash NAND dump 1 or 2, it is going to result in a red ring of death or red dot of death. So if you want to go back to a full retail system, you will need to desolder the wires we soldered on the bottom of the board and then flash over your retail image. Either way, you're going to want to take these files for your system and you're going to want to paste them somewhere safe. So here we go. At this point, we're pretty much done. The last things you'll need to do here are make sure your NAND programmer has been disconnected, unplug your console from power, and desolder all of the NAND points here as shown. Once you have them all desoldered, you can go ahead, clean up, and from there you kind of just work backwards with getting everything reassembled. If you're able to take it apart just fine, you should be able to reassemble it just fine. But anyways, that is really all there is to it with the Reset Glitch Hack 3. So now you can have some fun really messing around with your system and the awesome world of having a modified Xbox 360, homebrew, emulators, custom dashboards, all that fun stuff. I really hope this video helped you all out, and if you liked this video, showing your love with a like on the video would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like the video, a dislike is totally fine as well too, and if you're waiting for another variant on this, such as the Corona install or a FAT install, I do have plans for those as well too, but I figured the Trinity was not only a good guinea pig that I had on hand here to test with, but it is a good starter and pretty reliable on here as well. But yeah, if you've tried RGH 3 and you've made it to the end, let me know what your thoughts are, let me know of your successes, failures, whatever it might be. That's about it for this video. This is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone. Sorry everyone, she wants to see how to mod an Xbox. See, Lily? You want to mod Xboxes? That's it. It's that simple. Even you can understand it. Right? Never mind. Oh!